Hi there, this is Ken Thompson, and I'm going to give you a very short introduction to my book, A Systematic Guide to Change Management. If you want to be successful in change, you've got to think about really just three things, but they're difficult things. The first one is you must understand the nature of the change you're proposing. Secondly, you must understand the community you're trying to bring the change into. And thirdly, you must have thought through the types of conversations you're going to need to have with that community to bring the change. So this is the very essence of change management and a much simplified summary of what's contained in the book. So first of all, thinking of the change, I've got just a little checklist you can use. All the terms start with C. So first of all, campaign. What is the end result you wish to achieve, and by when do you wish to achieve it? Why is it important to change now when it hasn't been important before? It's a critical question. What's driving the change and what's driving the timeline? What are the behaviour transformations that would have to happen that haven't happened before for this change to be successful? What are your critical indicators? And we're thinking of two things. Early warning indicators that say your change project is off track, and ultimate measures of success. Constraints. You don't have unlimited resources, money, skills, time or access. You need to know what constraints you've got to work within, particularly within the community and the different players in it. What are the complications? If this was that easy, it would have been done already. What are the complications that make things more difficult than they might appear on the surface, and how do you plan to overcome those? And finally, what about the changes to the change? What are the risks, both internal and external, which would stop this change dead in its tracks? And how do you plan to mitigate against them? Time spent here thinking about the nature of the change you plan to bring is absolutely vital. So let's look at the community you're bringing the change to. And one very useful way of thinking of the community is this 6 circles diagram. Starting from the bottom, you have the sponsor of the change, usually somebody very senior and visible. You then have a steering group who are going to steer the change, and then you have a core team who are going to be the hands and feet on the ground of bringing the change to the community. Then there's 2 other groups that are vital for a change. I like to separate them out. Stakeholders are people who have authority, usually due to their position. And influencers have authority, but usually due to their reputation and social network. Now, one of the techniques that's very important here, very simple technique, is a stakeholder map, where you look at these smallish group of people and you place them on the map in terms of their influence and their attitude to change. And you're really looking for the high influence people, particularly supporters who best practices you build the change around, but also high influence opponents who will destroy a change if left to their own devices and not engaged with. So the stakeholder map, brilliant little tool for doing that, described in the book. Then with the community, then the constituents, these are the large group of people on the front line who this change has to be embedded in if it's going to bring any value to the organization or the business. And one way to think about constituents then is there's usually too many of them to think about the stakeholder map technique unless you're fortunate. It's a very good community, a very small community. So this adoption model can be very useful. People moving up a level at a time, but from unaware to aware to committed to using and sustaining. And what you need is you need some demonstrable and visible, observable characteristics of each stage, so you can see how your change management process is going. So that's the change community. We've looked at the change itself. The final thing is the conversations about change. I was nearly going to put the communications, but I think change really is not a one-way communication. It is a conversation. And when you're dealing with individuals, there's a change engagement model that it's generally accepted. You need to start building insight and building relationship, moving on to developing understanding and starting to influence people. And at that point, you need to look for commitment from those people to be a supporter or a champion for the change. Now, once you've got them to that place, you can't just leave them. You need to support and develop them, or else they won't be supporting your change the way you wanted them. So there's a change engagement model, really important, described in the book. The final thing is then, if you're looking at a large community that you've got a role change out to, then there's the community change activities. And I see 4 types of change activity as really vital. First of all, the preparation for change, getting your campaign right, setting up steering groups, doing whatever you need to the railway tracks in a sense of the change. Influencer then is engaging with the key people in the community, the influencers, the super connectors, the leaders in the community. Adoption is then the change activities themselves that will move people directly up the adoption ladder. And the final class of activity, it's often forgot about, is the risk mitigation activities. What are you going to do in your change program to mitigate the most obvious risks that could derail it? So we've been looking at the change, we've been looking at the community, looking at the conversations, and that's a systematic guide to change management.